The first time I stepped aboard Helios Prime, I felt as though I had entered the heart of the galaxy itself. The colossal medical station orbited no star, yet it shone brighter than many worlds, its silver corridors filled with doctors, scientists, admirals, and diplomats from hundreds of civilizations. Every major medical discovery passed through this place before reaching the wider galaxy. The Galactic Council guarded that knowledge with absolute authority, believing that the wrong technology in the wrong hands could doom entire species. Humanity had only recently earned a seat among them, and our delegation occupied one of the smallest platforms in the immense council chamber. Most delegates barely acknowledged our presence. To the ancient civilizations, humans were young, inexperienced, and medically primitive compared to the genetically perfected species of the core worlds. I said nothing. Sometimes the best way to understand a galaxy was to listen while everyone else assumed you had nothing worth saying. The silence inside the council chamber lasted only a moment before the emergency reports filled the air. One hologram after another appeared above the central platform, each showing another hospital ship drifting in flames, another research station reduced to twisted metal, another convoy of medical supplies disappearing into the darkness. The attacks all carried the same signature. A ruthless criminal organization calling itself the Void Syndicate had begun targeting every major center of medical research in known space. They ignored military installations and planetary governments. Instead, they hunted doctors, scientists, laboratories, and hospital vessels, stealing experimental biotechnology before destroying everything they could not carry away. Millions of lives were suddenly at risk, not only because people had died in the attacks, but because treatments for countless diseases had vanished with the stolen research. The chamber erupted into arguments. Ancient civilizations that had stood together for thousands of years now openly challenged one another. Some demanded every experimental regenerative project be shut down immediately. Others insisted that all advanced medical discoveries should remain locked inside Helios Prime until the Syndicate had been eliminated. Several delegates argued that certain technologies were simply too dangerous to exist, no matter how many lives they might eventually save. Fear spread through the chamber faster than any epidemic ever could. I remained silent, watching faces instead of holograms. I noticed the hesitation behind confident speeches and the uncertainty hidden beneath polished diplomacy. Every proposal was driven by the same emotion. They were no longer discussing medicine. They were discussing survival. The council had always believed knowledge could be controlled through laws and oversight, but now those beliefs were beginning to crack. As the debate grew louder, I realized something unsettling. No one was asking how to protect future discoveries. They were only arguing about how much knowledge they were willing to lose. That frightened me far more than the Syndicate itself. When the arguments finally began repeating themselves, the Chancellor looked across the chamber and asked whether any delegation that had not yet spoken wished to address the Council. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then I rose from my seat. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the smallest diplomatic platform in the chamber. Some delegates looked surprised that humanity intended to speak at all. Others wore polite expressions that barely concealed their impatience. I walked to the center podium without rushing, hearing only the quiet echo of my footsteps beneath the immense crystal dome. I represent Earth, I began. My people are new to this council, and we do not claim to possess the experience of civilizations that have practiced advanced medicine for thousands of years. Several delegates nodded, apparently satisfied that I understood humanity's place. But every medical breakthrough in history, I continued, began with someone willing to accept a risk. The chamber grew still. Technology alone has never saved a life. It is only a tool. What saves lives is the courage to use knowledge wisely, even when fear argues for doing nothing. I let the words settle before speaking again. If we allow criminals to decide which discoveries may exist, then we have already surrendered. The Void Syndicate does not fear our laboratories. It fears what those laboratories might accomplish tomorrow. A few delegates exchanged uncertain glances, but most remained unmoved. I could almost hear their thoughts. The human was speaking from emotion rather than centuries of scientific tradition. They respected my sincerity, perhaps, but not my conclusions. To them, courage belonged to soldiers, while medicine demanded caution above all else. I stepped away from the podium knowing I had changed very few minds. Even so, I felt strangely calm. Sometimes the truth required patience long before it earned belief. The first voice to answer mine belonged to Chief Bioarchitect Terex of the Core Worlds. He rose slowly, folding 4 slender arms behind his back as though preparing to correct an inexperienced student rather than address another representative. "Your words are admirable, Ambassador," he said, "but medicine is not advanced through bravery. It is advanced through precision, restraint, and centuries of biological mastery." A ripple of approval spread through the chamber. Another delegate stood before I could reply. She represented the Vayari Collective, a civilization whose people had rewritten their own genetic code thousands of years before humanity had discovered electricity. "No responsible scientist," she declared, "experiments on living beings without overwhelming certainty. Risk is the language of primitive medicine." Several delegates inclined their heads in agreement. A third speaker, an elderly physician from the Elysian Concord, regarded me with genuine sympathy. "Human biology remains remarkably uncomplicated. Your species possesses neither adaptive cellular engineering nor hereditary regeneration. You simply lack the biological foundation necessary to understand the technologies now under discussion." Soft laughter echoed across the immense chamber. It was not cruel laughter. It was the polite amusement reserved for someone who had spoken beyond their expertise. To them, my statement sounded hopeful rather than scientific, idealistic rather than practical. I resisted the urge to answer. Defending humanity would accomplish nothing. Every civilization in this room measured progress by genetic perfection, engineered evolution, and medical achievements accumulated over millennia. By those standards, Earth truly was primitive. I returned to my seat without another word. The debate resumed almost immediately, my brief interruption already fading into the background. Yet as I watched the delegates argue once more, I found myself wondering whether any of them remembered that medicine had always begun with uncertainty. Every cure, every discovery, every impossible breakthrough had once existed only because someone accepted a risk that everyone else considered unacceptable. Perhaps history would remind them. If not today, then soon. The council remained behind me, still trapped in endless debate, but my thoughts were already drifting toward another part of the galaxy. At that very moment, hundreds of light years away on the Orion frontier, Commander Ethan Carter was leading a routine scientific survey that none of us expected to become part of galactic history. I had met Ethan only once before his departure. Like most exploration officers, he preferred listening to speeches rather than giving them. He possessed the quiet confidence that seemed common among experienced human explorers. He never exaggerated dangers, never complained about difficult assignments, and never sought recognition for his work. To many alien observers, that calm attitude looked almost detached. To those of us from Earth, it simply meant he had learned to focus on the problem instead of the fear surrounding it. His expedition vessel, Pathfinder, had spent weeks mapping ancient ruins scattered across abandoned systems near the frontier. The structures belonged to a civilization that had vanished long before humanity had discovered spaceflight. Ethan's team carefully documented every artifact, respecting local treaties and maintaining peaceful relations with nearby colonies. Their mission carried no military purpose. They explored, studied, and shared their findings with every civilization willing to cooperate. Then everything changed. Without warning, unidentified ships emerged from behind a dense asteroid field. Their transponders were silent. Their hulls carried no recognizable insignia. Before Ethan's crew could establish communications, precision weapons struck the Pathfinder, crippling its engines and tearing through its defensive systems. The attack was swift, disciplined, and completely unprovoked. The survey ship fought only long enough to protect its civilian scientists before ordering an evacuation. Escape pods scattered through the darkness while the damaged vessel drifted helplessly toward the edge of the system. No distress call reached the Council. No nearby patrol arrived to intervene. For several terrifying minutes, Ethan and his surviving crew believed they had been abandoned in the endless silence of space. They had no idea that help was already on its way. When Commander Ethan Carter regained consciousness, the first thing he noticed was the silence. The violent alarms of the Pathfinder were gone, replaced by a steady rhythmic hum unlike anything he had heard before. Bright white lights filled the room above him, and unfamiliar symbols drifted across transparent medical displays. Every movement sent sharp pain through his body, but the fact that he could still feel anything at all seemed almost miraculous. An elegant figure stepped into view. Her silver robes carried the insignia of the Aurelian Medical Corps, one of the most respected humanitarian organizations in the galaxy. "My name is Dr. Celine Aris," she said gently. "You are aboard the hospital ship Lumina. We recovered your escape pod moments before it lost life support." Ethan tried to sit up, but the monitors around him erupted in warning tones. "Easy," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You have suffered catastrophic injuries." Another physician approached carrying a glowing medical scanner. His expression became increasingly troubled as he studied the results. "Doctor," he whispered. Celine accepted the scanner without a word. Her calm face slowly hardened. "He has lost nearly all of his blood." The medical team exchanged anxious glances. Advanced Aurelian medicine could repair shattered organs, regenerate damaged tissue, and even replace limbs. None of those technologies mattered if the patient's circulatory system had already collapsed. "There is one possibility," the senior physician finally said. The room fell silent. "The living nanofluid." Celine looked up immediately. "It has never been tested outside our species. It has never been tested on anyone this close to death either." The living nanofluid was the Aurelian Union's most experimental medical achievement. Instead of simply replacing blood, it functioned as a living biological partner, repairing damaged cells while adapting to the host's body. On Aurelians, early trials had shown extraordinary promise. On any other species, no one knew. Celine looked at Ethan. "If we do nothing," she said quietly, "you will die within minutes." She hesitated before continuing. "If we attempt the procedure, I cannot promise you will survive." Ethan met her eyes without hesitation. "Then let's give your experiment a chance." The operating theater aboard the Lumina became unusually quiet. No one hurried. No one spoke louder than necessary. Every member of the medical team understood they were about to cross a line that centuries of Aurelian ethics had never allowed them to cross. The living nanofluid represented decades of research, but until this moment it had never been introduced into the body of a non-Aurelian. There had never been a volunteer. There had never been a patient desperate enough to make the impossible seem reasonable. I would later read the official medical record. Every physician present signed the authorization with visible hesitation. Some believed they were attempting to save a dying man. Others feared they were about to kill him with an experiment no responsible doctor should perform. Ethan never shared their doubts. "If I don't survive," he said calmly from the operating table, "don't let my crew think you gave up." Dr. Celine Aris nodded once. "We never do." The procedure began immediately. Machines removed what little blood remained inside Ethan's body while microscopic streams of living nanofluid flowed through transparent tubes toward his failing heart. Unlike artificial blood, the nanofluid was alive. Billions of microscopic biological machines communicated with one another, searching for damaged tissue, repairing cells, and attempting to establish harmony with their new host. For the first several minutes, every monitor predicted the same outcome. Cardiac instability, neurological failure, total systemic rejection. One physician quietly whispered that they should prepare to record the time of death. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of attacking the foreign nanofluid, Ethan's immune system slowed. His cells did not reject it. They examined it, adapted to it, accepted it. The warning alarms disappeared one by one. His heartbeat steadied, oxygen levels climbed, damaged organs began repairing themselves at a pace no medical database could explain. No one in the operating room moved. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the monitors as impossible numbers slowly became undeniable. The experiment that everyone expected to end in tragedy had just become the greatest medical mystery the galaxy had ever witnessed. The celebration lasted less than 3 minutes. Dr. Celine Aris had barely finished recording the first impossible medical readings when the hospital ship's emergency alarms echoed through every deck. The peaceful hum of medical equipment was drowned out by the sharp pulse of combat warnings. Unknown vessels exiting hyperspace. A voice announced over the intercom. Multiple hostile contacts approaching at high velocity. Every doctor in the operating room froze. Celine looked toward the tactical display as red markers rapidly surrounded the Lumina. There were too many to count at a glance. The Void Syndicate had found them. No one knew how, but the timing left little room for coincidence. Either they had tracked the damaged Pathfinder before the rescue, or they had been searching for Aurelian medical vessels all along. Whatever the reason, they had arrived at the worst possible moment. "They, re-hailing us," one of the officers reported. A harsh voice filled the ship. "This is the Void Syndicate. Power down your engines and prepare to surrender. We know what you, carrying. Transfer the experimental nanotechnology and the human survivor immediately. Resist, and every life aboard will be forfeit." Silence followed. The crew understood exactly what that meant. They didn't just want the living nanofluid. They wanted Ethan. Inside the operating room, Celine stared at the recovering commander. Only minutes earlier, he had been moments from death. His body was still adapting to the nanofluid, and every medical protocol demanded complete rest. Another explosion shook the ship. The lights flickered, forward shields collapsing. Came another report. Doctors hurried to secure patients as gravity fluctuated across the vessel. Medical carts slid across the floor, and ceiling panels showered sparks into the corridor. Ethan slowly opened his eyes. He could hear the alarms. He could feel the vibrations of enemy fire striking the hull. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Celine hesitated. "The Syndicate found us." He looked toward the sealed blast doors, then back at the frightened doctors surrounding him. His injuries were healing far faster than anyone believed possible. Outside, the battle for the Lumina had already begun. The ship trembled again as another volley struck the outer shields. Somewhere beyond the reinforced walls, emergency teams fought to keep the Lumina alive while medical personnel rushed frightened patients toward protected wards. No one aboard had expected to become a battlefield. They had dedicated their lives to saving others, not defending themselves. Ethan slowly swung his legs over the edge of the medical bed. Every doctor in the room turned toward him in alarm. "You shouldn't even be conscious," one physician said. "I know," Ethan replied, standing carefully. His muscles protested for only a second before the discomfort vanished. He looked down at his hands, opening and closing his fingers. The deep wounds that had covered his arms only minutes earlier had faded into thin silver lines before disappearing completely. He could feel something moving through his body. Not painfully, but purposefully, as if every cell had suddenly learned exactly what it needed to do. Dr. Celine watched the medical monitors in disbelief. "Your bones have completely regenerated," she whispered. "Internal bleeding has stopped. The nanofluid is adapting." Ethan took a slow breath. He felt stronger than he had ever remembered, yet strangely calm. There was no rush of power, no overwhelming surge of emotion. Only clarity. Another explosion interrupted the silence. "The Syndicate has breached Deck 6, the intercom announced. "Security teams are falling back toward the medical wings." Celine stepped in front of Ethan. "You are still my patient. And those people out there are yours," he answered quietly. "If they reach this room, every patient here becomes a target." She knew he was right. Reluctantly, she handed him a lightweight emergency sidearm taken from a nearby security locker. "It won't be enough." Ethan checked the weapon before looking back at her. "It doesn't have to be." He walked toward the blast doors without another word. The doctors watched him disappear into the smoke-filled corridor, uncertain whether they had just released a recovering patient or witnessed the birth of something medical science had never imagined possible. The corridor beyond the medical ward had become a battlefield. Smoke drifted through the emergency lights, and damaged bulkheads sparked with every impact from enemy fire. Security officers struggled to hold their positions as armored syndicate raiders advanced methodically through the ship. They weren't firing wildly. Every movement was disciplined. Every objective was clear. They were fighting their way toward Ethan and the laboratory that held the living nanofluid. Ethan reached the defensive line just as another explosion threw 2 security guards to the floor. Without thinking, he rushed forward, pulling one of them behind cover before a burst of plasma scorched the wall where they had been lying only a second earlier. "You should fall back," one officer shouted. Ethan ignored him. The syndicate breached the next blast door, pouring into the corridor with military precision. Plasma bolts filled the air. One struck Ethan squarely in the shoulder, throwing him against the wall with enough force to crack the metal behind him. Every witness expected him to stay down. Instead, he stood. The wound closed before their eyes. The damaged tissue regenerated in seconds, and the nanofluid restored the destroyed cells faster than anyone could comprehend. Even Ethan looked briefly surprised before refocusing on the civilians trapped farther down the corridor. "Get the patients out," he shouted. "We'll hold them here." Doctors, nurses, and volunteers hurried stretchers toward evacuation shuttles while security teams regained their confidence. Seeing Ethan survive what should have been a fatal injury changed something in everyone. Fear gave way to determination. The battle ended only after syndicate reinforcements realized they could no longer reach the laboratory. Their surviving fighters retreated, abandoning wounded comrades as they escaped into deep space. Ethan immediately crossed the corridor and knelt beside one of the injured raiders. A young Aurelian doctor stared at him in disbelief. "That's the enemy." "They're still patients," Ethan replied calmly. Together they treated civilians, security officers, and captured syndicate soldiers without distinction. Watching the human who had survived the impossible save the lives of those who had tried to kill him, every physician aboard the Lumina reached the same conclusion. The greatest discovery was never an unstoppable warrior. It was a new future for medicine itself. News of the battle aboard the Lumina spread across the galaxy long before the damaged hospital ship reached Helios Prime. At first, many dismissed the reports as exaggerated stories told by frightened survivors. A human whose body had accepted living nanofluid? A patient recovering from fatal injuries in minutes? It sounded impossible, even by the standards of experimental medicine. The disbelief ended when Dr. Celine Aris released the complete medical records. Every scan, every blood analysis, every cellular recording was made available to the Galactic Medical Council. Hundreds of laboratories independently examined the data, expecting to uncover an error in the Aurelian equipment or a mistake in the procedure itself. They found neither. Instead, they reached the same extraordinary conclusion. Human cells had not merely tolerated the living nanofluid. They had formed a stable biological partnership with it. The nanofluid adapted to human physiology while the human immune system accepted it as an ally rather than an invader. No known species had ever demonstrated such compatibility. What had been designed as an experimental Aurelian treatment suddenly became the foundation for an entirely new branch of regenerative medicine. Research institutes across the galaxy immediately began collaborating. Scientists who had once guarded their discoveries behind layers of secrecy now exchanged information freely, eager to understand what they had witnessed. Diseases that had resisted treatment for centuries suddenly appeared vulnerable. Organ failure, irreversible nerve damage, and genetic disorders that had been considered permanent were no longer viewed as impossible challenges but as medical problems waiting for solutions. As I read each new report arriving from Helios Prime, I thought back to the council debate only days earlier. They had argued that dangerous knowledge should be hidden away forever. Yet the greatest breakthrough in modern medicine had been born from a desperate decision to save a single life. Sometimes history changed because of careful planning. Sometimes it changed because one doctor refused to let a patient die. This time, it had changed because both had happened together. The emergency session of the Galactic Council reconvened only 2 weeks after the attack on the Lumina. This time, the atmosphere inside Helios Prime was completely different. The delegates who had once questioned humanity's understanding of medicine now sat in thoughtful silence as Dr. Celine Aris presented the final results of Ethan Carter's treatment. No one interrupted her. No one dismissed the evidence. The data spoke with a certainty that words never could. When the presentation ended, High Chancellor Valor rose from his seat. By unanimous decision, he announced, the Galactic Council recognizes the living nanofluid adaptation as the greatest medical breakthrough of this era. A wave of quiet approval swept through the chamber. He continued, in recognition of humanity's indispensable contribution, the Council offers the government of Earth exclusive ownership of the nanofluid integration technology. All research rights, production licenses, and medical patents shall belong solely to humanity. No civilization will use this discovery without your authorization. Every eye in the chamber turned toward me. Only weeks earlier, those same delegates had regarded humans as inexperienced newcomers. Now they were offering us control over the most valuable medical technology in galactic history. Whoever owned it would possess unimaginable influence across the stars. I stood slowly and looked around the chamber. I am honored by your trust, I said. But Earth cannot accept this offer. Several delegates exchanged confused glances. I continued before anyone could speak. Knowledge that saves lives does not belong to one world, one species, or one government. The chamber became perfectly still. If this discovery can cure the sick, heal the wounded, and give families more time with the people they love, then it belongs to everyone willing to use it responsibly. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dr. Celine Aris rose to her feet. Others followed. Within seconds, the entire council chamber stood together in silent respect. That day, humanity refused the greatest monopoly in galactic history, and in doing so, earned something far more valuable than power. It earned the trust of the galaxy. The months that followed transformed the galaxy in ways no one had imagined possible. Helios Prime, once guarded by suspicion and political rivalry, became the center of an unprecedented scientific alliance. Laboratories that had spent centuries competing for prestige now opened their doors to researchers from every civilization. Human physicians worked beside Aurelian specialists. Core world geneticists shared their knowledge with young Earth biologists, and discoveries that would once have remained classified were exchanged freely across hundreds of star systems. Commander Ethan Carter recovered completely. Although countless worlds celebrated him as the man who had changed medicine forever, he refused every invitation to become a public hero. After giving his testimony to the council, he quietly returned to exploration duty, insisting that thousands of doctors deserved the credit far more than he did. I was only the patient, he often said. The people who saved me are the ones who changed history. Inspired by the partnership between Earth and Aurelia, the Council established the Interstellar Academy of Regenerative Medicine on Helios Prime. Students from every known species studied together, learning not only new medical techniques but also the importance of trust and cooperation. Young doctors no longer asked which civilization had made a discovery. They asked how quickly it could reach those who needed it most. Even former rivals found themselves working side by side. Civilizations that had argued bitterly over patents and scientific recognition now shared research without hesitation, understanding that every breakthrough belonged to the countless patients still waiting for hope. As I walked through the academy during its opening ceremony, I saw something I would never forget. A human surgeon and an Aurelian physician stood together, teaching students from a dozen different worlds. No one cared where the lesson had begun. They cared only that it continued. Looking around that crowded hall, I realized the Void Syndicate had failed in the most important way possible. They had tried to steal knowledge through fear. Instead, they had united the galaxy through it. Centuries have passed since those extraordinary events, yet every student entering the Galactic Medical Archives begins with the same lesson. I often visit the Hall of First Discoveries, where the original records from the Lumina are preserved exactly as they were written. Looking back, I realize how wrong we all were. We believed medicine advanced only through perfect technology. We believed caution alone could protect civilization. Most of all, we believed no one would risk everything to save a complete stranger. We were wrong. The day Aurelian doctors replaced a dying human's blood with living nanofluid, they expected to witness a tragic failure. Instead, they witnessed the birth of a new era. One courageous decision reshaped galactic medicine forever, proving that the greatest breakthroughs are born not from certainty, but from compassion, trust, and the willingness to hope when every calculation predicts failure.